with us this morning. A few housekeeping things before we get started. Please, everyone, keep yourselves muted throughout today's presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Zoom chat function by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen that says chat in order to type your question, and we'd be happy to address any questions or comments throughout today's tour. Florence will be giving us a few pauses during her presentation, and we will address any questions that have come up or any comments as well. If you're joining us over on Facebook Live, welcome to you as well. You can also ask any questions you may have using the comment section on Facebook, and we'll be monitoring those comments and answering those questions throughout the tour as well. Lastly, this tour is being recorded and streamed live and will be posted to our social media channels once the tour is over. If you would like to rewatch this tour or watch other tours put on by the Timken Museum previously, please check out our Facebook page to find those. I will be turning on captions, so please don't be alarmed if you start seeing little words pop up. We've had some comments and asking for us for that option, so thank you for those. We'll be turning those on momentarily. Without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Gillman this morning. Dr. Florence Gillman has been a docent at the Timken since 2022, and she has been a member of the USD's faculty since 1986. At USD, Dr. Gillman has served as chair of the Department of Theology and Religious Studies. Oh my gosh, sorry. Coordinator of the program in Interdisciplinary Humanities and coordinator of the program in Classics. So without further ado, I will pass it on to you, Dr. Gillman.
Oh, thank you, Renata. Good morning, everybody. I see some of you that I know, and I see some that I have not met yet. Welcome to you all. So today I am going to talk about the structure of various pieces of art known as a triptych. You can say triptych if you want. I think the more common pronunciation is triptych. And I decided to do this lecture out of my own curiosity because I've noticed triptychs in many different places, and the Timken Museum has three and sort of a fourth that I will tell you about. I wanted to look at the history of triptychs and to see if the format affects the meaning. So I would say that is the main question driving this. Does format affect meaning? So a triptych, by definition, has three sections, and these sections are hinged together. Usually the middle section is bigger than the two wings, so that when you fold in the wings, they fold in, not back. They fold forward. So usually the two wings cover the center, but not always. And I will show you a situation where it's very important that the center is not covered by the lateral, by the wings. So I noticed in the Timken's two Italian triptychs. So these are a medieval triptychs, Italian, both from the 1300s. I'll show you some more data about that. But I noticed myself an interesting thing, which is that while these are scenes from the life of Jesus and Mary and theologically portraying the Christian idea of the Trinity right here in the center of the left triptych, I noticed that they also have anachronistically St. Francis. So he's down here on the left, and he's over here on the right. So that's anachronistic. St. Francis was not at the crucifixion. St. Francis lived late 1100s, 1200s. His movement was incredibly important during the period when these triptychs were created. And that got me wondering about them. It's so obvious that they're portable. They're not very big. I'll give you the dimensions in a minute too. You could fold them up and you could probably fit them in some kind of a canvas or leather bag and carry them around. And so then I started thinking, I wonder if the Franciscan movement, which was a movement of preachers who moved around, they didn't stay in the monasteries like the previous groups had mainly done. They were wandering around all over the place. And I wondered if these were some sort of like their portable media to teach about Jesus and so on. So that's how I got thinking about triptychs. So this is the oldest one that the museum has. Let me see, I think it is older than, yeah. This one by Luca de Tommè is the oldest one that the Timken has. By no means old as triptychs go. They go way back into the ancient world. But here you can see the size. So you can see basically 22 inches by 21 inches. So almost like 2 feet by 2 feet. And therefore you can see how it would be portable. Pretty easy, fold it up, put it in a bag and carry it around. That could have that was my theory, that perhaps that's why St. Francis was put into the scene. There could be other reasons too, of course, because he was incredibly popular, because he really turned the Christian world on its head, beginning the incredible need for reform already in the late 1100s, early 1200s. So that's one of the Timken's great treasures. And then this is the other one. This one is by Buonaccorso. This one is just a little bit later. Absolutely gorgeous. And again, here you see St. Francis. What I noticed about this one too, of course, is how fancy the carving is on the backdrop, of course. And that started to make me think, well, maybe portability isn't the most important thing, because if you take around something with that kind of a fine tooth structure to it, it could easily chip away and break and so on. But anyway, these are the two triptych treasures that we see in the Italian gallery. And like I say, I'm not going to talk about the content as much as the format. So there is another triptych at the Timken. It's very small. It's in with the Russian icons. And if you're a docent, it's on the toward the back wall of the layout of the icons. I hadn't paid much attention to it until I started to check to make sure I had seen every triptych in the museum, and somebody told me, "Hey, wait, there's one in Russian icons." So as you can see by the data I put on here, it's 19th century, so it's not really that old. It looks very old. It's in tough shape. It is very small, which suggests that it was something of private devotion to the people who originally made it, and that fits the kind of character of the icons that the Timken sisters, especially Amy, were buying in the early 20th century for Amy's collection of Russian icons. So small. You can see the hinges. You can see, how it would have been closed. Now, I would call your attention to one important part of the content, and that is the larger frame here, which has what's known in Russian Orthodox and Greek Orthodox thinking about the Bible as the Old Testament Trinity. So there's a story in Genesis about there's 3 visitors who come to Abraham, and they predict that Abraham's wife Sarah will eventually give birth to Isaac and so on. And in retrospect, they were considered angels or messengers from God. But in thinking about all that, tradition has said they weren't just angels, they were the Trinity. Well, this is a very important scene in Orthodoxy, and the most famous icon using this scene has been in the news lately. So I thought I'd remind you about that in case you haven't heard about it. So this incredible icon by Andrei Rublev is known all over the world. It may be the most famous icon in the world, maybe. 1425, Rublev painted this. It somehow, thanks to a lot of luck, ended up surviving the early Soviet period of destruction of icons and the prior period in the 9th century, when within Orthodoxy itself, a period of iconoclasm which destroyed a lot of icons. Somehow this postdates that period of iconoclasm. So that's why it was not destroyed then, but the fact that it survived the Soviet purge is phenomenal. A number of phenomenal icons did survive the purge, and you can see them especially in Moscow in the Triptychs gallery. I have been there. I've wandered through it, just stunned by the gorgeous, gorgeous icons and other paintings that the Triptychs possesses. So in spite of the drive to have an atheistic society, somehow some phenomenal things survived in the Soviet period. What happened recently is that Putin ordered this icon to be moved into the Kremlin, where there are magnificent churches, and into the Cathedral of the Annunciation within the Kremlin. I'm not sure if he gave a reason, but outside observers point out that it looks like a political move. It looks like a reason to make the patriarch, to please the patriarch, who has been extremely severely criticized around the world for giving his support, thus the support of the Russian Orthodox Church to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So whatever. Now, it's hard to get pictures of it, but this is the one I have so far. So yeah, it's not a good picture, but you can see its location right now in the cathedral, placed so that Russian people can get up close to it and see it. So that's something interesting to watch in the world of icons, and a pretty interesting development. Okay, continuing on with, let's look at triptychs in history, because I already said they go way back. They actually go back to ancient Rome and to Roman Egypt. And we find the format even in very early Byzantines, successors to the Romans in the East. We find this format there too. Fully a third of the early Christian Byzantine icons are at St. Catherine's. They do not remain in the format of a triptych. They've been taken apart, but you can tell that they were part of a triptych. Every time I give a lecture, for those of you who have been with me for 2 years now, my loyal friends and other docents, I always talk about St. Catherine's, don't I? It's hard to believe how important it is. With so many roads of looking at art with an interest in the ancient world, with an interest in Christianity and Judaism, just take you to St. Catherine's. That's how it is. Anyway, The ones at St. Catherine's are notably small, quite many of them, which suggests, as those Amy collected for the Timken collection, suggests they were for private worship. So there's St. Catherine's. I always show you St. Catherine's. Here and there, I meet somebody who's been there. I really want to go. And now it has gotten even more dangerous than it was more recently. I would say, in the 21st century, it's been awful because there's a branch of the equivalent of Al-Qaeda very active there, threatening all kinds of places like St. Catherine's. But now, of course, it's even worse because it's in the Sinai, and the Sinai is on the verge of tremendous changes if the Gazans can move there. If the Gazans can somehow escape the terrible situation that the Russians or that the Hamas has created and Israel has created. But anyway, if you wanted to see the greatest number of ancient Christian icons in the world, this is the place. And they have allowed their collection to be digitized, and most of it can be seen online. All right, at the Timken, the icons that we have are in the Russian icon gallery, and you may know, or you may recall, if you're a docent, that this gallery is laid out along the lines of a typical Orthodox church. So in the way this is laid out, we're looking at the front of the church. And so where my cursor is where people would be seated. And then there's this door, the royal door, that no person who is not a priest or a deacon may go through. So when the door is open, you see the opening right here. When the door is open, the priests and the deacons go through that back to the altar to pray the part of the Eucharist, the consecration. So doors are important, and triptychs in a way are like royal doors. Okay, when the doors are closed, the suggestion is there is something to see, and at times it will be open and you can see what is behind it. Okay, back to the format again. So like a royal door, a triptych can be open or it can be folded shut. And there are other formats that aren't just three. There are other types of folding art pieces that we would, depending on the number of parts, we would call polyptychs. The thing is, it establishes the threshold between the exterior and the interior, or between the center and the sides. So if you fold in the doors, the lateral sides, and no one can see what's in there, then it establishes, well, first of all, there's something behind that you don't know about and you can't see until you open it. So there's some suggestion of, you could say, mystery, I guess. It creates a mystery for a viewer. And yeah, there is some art that uses this format. Not all triptychs are religious. I would say it appears that most, at least of those that exist or are known about, are religious, but not all are religious. So this format is used for other reasons too. Now, how does format contribute to the meaning? Well, the emphasis is placed on the center. I'm just checking the chat because I already have some questions here. And I think I'll be answering both of these questions as we go along. Okay, so yeah, the emphasis is placed on the center, and the wings or the lateral sides, may add to what is being portrayed in the center. They make sometimes the story, when you open the triptych, sometimes the story goes from left to right so that it's sequential. Other times the wings have other functions. Sometimes donors are in the wings. So sometimes the wings are subordinate to the center. Yeah, so these doors are significant, and that's why they have been called paintings with doors. Sometimes they're called leaves, sometimes wings. The point is that triptychs have boundaries. There are boundaries between the panels, and that can help to reflect a different status for what is being communicated in the center, as opposed to or in conjunction with the doors. Sometimes, and I'll show you some, where some triptychs were only allowed to be open on certain feast days. That's pretty interesting. So for most of the time, they would be closed, mysterious piece of art. Haha, here and there we find out that you could pay here and there to look inside them. So that would be a source of income also for, let's say, a church that possessed a triptych. Now, this one's really famous. This is in the Metropolitan Museum at their upriver cloisters museum. I'm sure many of you know the cloisters. So this is the very famous Merode altarpiece. And while we're not going to emphasize, as I said, the content, let me show you in terms of the format. Here you can actually see the hinges. So you can see this has been very carefully constructed and has survived extremely well. It is a portrayal of the Annunciation to Mary with Joseph working in his workshop. It is not known who this is over here, but in this triptych, you can see one of the functions of the leaves, and that is this portrays perhaps the donors who have commissioned this, but they know they don't belong in the painting. They know they weren't there. So the format allows for some, you could say, historical accuracy in this case. So it was practical, but also the panels protected the center from dust and damage, and protected it during transport. Actually, if you had it closed and it was positioned in a chapel or a church, the closed format was an advantage because the painting didn't deteriorate so quickly from candle smoke. Okay, so we know a lot of artwork has been darkened by candle smoke if it was in a religious situation. So that format was also practical. And people knew that. People in medieval people, Renaissance people, they knew that candle smoke was damaging to artworks. It also allows you to develop the story more. You could, as I already showed you, you could put donors on the leaf and so on, but you can also have a triptych that would tell a story from left to right. So we already talked about that. A lot of them were used as altarpieces, but some were by a tomb. This would be like an indoor, in church or in public building tomb, and you could have a triptych as an epitaph by a tomb. And many times they would be just partially opened. So other interesting things about the format, a tripartite format reflects the Christianity's idea of the Trinity, which is reflected in the layout of Christian churches, where you have a main altar and you have two side altars. So this idea of main altar, two side altars, that's portrayed also by the format of a triptych. One of the most famous is Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. This is in the Prado. Yeah, this is an extraordinary piece that looks like this when it's folded up. Now, this apparently is meant to portray the third day of creation, according to Genesis. It's before, in Genesis, God makes the plants. Excuse me, it's after God has made the plants, you see the plants, but before God makes animals and humans. So when you open this, yeah, this is what you get, which is absolutely mind-boggling. Okay, so easily this is a very famous, very famous triptych. Moving from the Garden of Eden on the left through the human situation called the Garden of Earthly Delights to hell. Now, why is it moving to hell? Why doesn't it move to heaven? Well, because the earthly delights that are being portrayed are those that might get you put in hell, according to the thinking. So, in other words, this is meant to be read sequentially from left to right. So the Garden of Eden, where all is perfect, and then the human situation that deteriorates person by person, deed by deed, and so on, and then the final portrayal of hell. It's not an altarpiece. That's kind of interesting because if it was, it would be pretty depressing, first of all, and it would not reflect actually, if it was a Christian altarpiece, it would not reflect the basic optimism of Christianity that salvation is open to everyone. So, yeah. Now we could spend a huge amount of time on this. And again, I'm moving on because I'm working on format. But you could see this in the Prado. There's awful lot written about it. Truly, it is one of the most famous. Okay, I'm going to stop for a minute. Renata, could we, okay. And I'm looking at the chat questions. Someone asked if there's artwork visible on the back of the wings. Yes, sometimes, not always, but many times. Okay, and someone asked about the destruction of icons. So I alluded to that. There was a period in the 800s when within Orthodoxy itself, people led by the emperor, not by the patriarch, so not by the religious side, but led by you could say the secular side, thought that people were worshiping icons in themselves. So thought that actual painting, that actual wood had power. And therefore the emperor ordered the total destruction of icons, which is so sad. So we call that period the period of iconoclasm. It was over by the middle of the 9th century. One of the final events that caused it to end was 1,000 monks paraded through Constantinople, each carrying an icon and saying, this is valid. This is a valid form of spirituality. What happened at St. Catherine's, luckily for world history, luckily for the treasures of civilization being kept, surviving, is that it was already under the control of Islam. So Islam did not care about icons, and they did not care. They did not order the destruction of icons. So where Orthodoxy was under the control of Islam, icons survived. I think I answered all the questions so far, but please feel free. Someone referred to Petrus Christus. We're coming to that.
We actually
Huh? What?
Sorry. We actually just received one from Ryan while you were speaking about the other questions.
Okay, yeah. Well, someone says, seeing a parallel today with Western culture undergoing a similar destruction of icons. Well, we could discuss that afterwards. I think that would not be so much an art question. Let's see. But also the Petrus Christus, we're coming to that. So we can treat your question then. And someone asked, how often do we find the entire panels together? I'm not sure that there are statistics about that, but an awful lot of them have been taken apart. Because if you took them apart, it was easier with the really big ones to move them. But also, if you took them apart, you could sell three things instead of one, and on and on. There were advantages. Is there a connection to Martin Luther with icons and iconoclasm? Iconoclasm in the Reformation, the Protestant side was very concerned about the use of statues and art in Roman Catholicism. But Luther and Lutheranism were the least radical about that. So Lutheranism retains a certain amount of art, especially art of the Last Supper and so on. The more radical side of the Reformation would allow absolutely no art, would want no art in churches. The Catholic Church itself, in the post-Reformation period when there was a council, it's called the Council of Trent, came up with a very vivid, interesting directions of what kind of art is allowed in a church and what the art may portray and so on. So there was a reformation of the use of art even within Catholicism. Okay, I think I caught up with the questions. So do you, but Renata, is everybody off mute, unmuted? And
Uh,
would,
if they would like to mute, they can do it themselves. I can only mute them if they're unmuted.
oh, I see. Okay. All right. It looks like Corrine, you want to say something?
Yes, thank you so much, Florence, for this incredible lecture. I'm enthralled with this and really wonderful details about Martin Luther as well. As a contemporary Baptist, I'm heartened to hear that they didn't destroy all the art in all contexts. So thank you for that. And I'm curious to know if the format of triptychs, has there ever been an exploration of this format in a textual or a literary sense? Of course, it's known as a visual medium, especially in the context of today. But has there ever been an artist to contemplate how to translate this into a text format?
I don't really know the answer to that. I don't think we would translate art into text. We more likely translate text into art. Okay, so we do have many publications that line up the Gospels in parallel and show like if the three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, if they have the same story, we line them up in three parallel columns, and we can analyze the differences. And that is very painstaking work. We do it all the time. And we can also see then who copied from who and who left out a phrase, who added in a phrase. Yeah, so we do that kind of work.
That's
Okay,
incredible.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's continue, Renata, if you can mute, and we'll try to do quite a bit more here. Okay, so I'm trying to move on here. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you some war stories, believe it or not. Okay. And all of these war stories are connected to the world wars and have something to do with triptychs. So there was a surge of creating triptychs in the United States during World War II. So there was a private citizens group who organized artists to create portable artwork for Jewish and Christian religious services. And so they created triptychs to send to the military to use for religious services. So this was especially Jewish and Christian. So we know that at least 460 triptychs were made by 70 artists. So the most famous, as far as I can tell, are Nina Wheeler and Hildreth Mayer. Because this is a new area of research for me, I haven't followed up on both of them. I mainly followed up on Hildreth, and so I'll tell you a little bit about her. So she was an American muralist, 20th century muralist. You can see the dates of her life at the top. And she wrote, during the Second World War, being too old for the waves, I've taught first aid, and as vice president of the Citizens Committee for the Army, Navy, and Air Corps Incorporated, organized a group of artists who designed and painted portable triptychs for the service chaplains. We sent out over 500, of which I did over 70. So we get some good data from her, and this is one that she did. So this is a Jewish triptych with the Ten Commandments in the center and the Lions of Judah on the left and on the right. So here you can see not only the advantage of providing art for the service people, but also the portability. So you see how this folded. Obviously, this, I think, folded left over and right back, something like that, because unless the hinging was so big that you could fold left, right first and left on top of that. The hinges suggest they're bigger on the side. Anyway, this is a very important idea. You still see it in military today. I have spoken in an Air Force chapel, for example, where if I was to speak to a Christian group, they pulled a curtain string, and the curtain pulled back, and there was a cross. So it was now Christian. And if they pulled it the other way, if I was speaking to a Jewish group, they pulled it the other way, and there was a Star of David. So it only takes a little bit of art to define a space. And we call it, defining sacred space. So this was a wonderful way to give the troops some sense that while they are worshiping either Jewish or in a Jewish or Christian way, the space is theirs. And so the art was really a really great gift, really powerful. This is a whole area that could be researched, and I'm just telling you a little bit right now. All right, now somebody already asked about this painting, and this is another war story, and this is another Timken painting. We are very lucky to have this painting. We call it the Petrus Christus after the Dutch artist. It's the death of the Virgin, and the thing about this is it was a triptych, but no longer is. The wings are gone. So I think in this case, I refer you to the provenance of this artwork. So I copied it at the bottom here. This is the provenance that the museum gives us. So you can see we can trace back where this was even into the 16th century. That's pretty great because it was just produced in the 15th. So from the 16th century on, all right, you can see historically where this has been, who's had it. And what is pretty interesting to me also is that it's in New York already by 1938. Okay, so pre-war, pre-World War II, and it doesn't come into the Timken collection until 1951. But I think it's pre-war is important because this part of the triptych was already in the United States. The question is, and it has been theorized, that it had wings. And they obviously then were not with it, and that's where the story lies. So here's an article from 1952, so less than 10 years after the end of the war, where the author, Christopher Norris, publishes a list of paintings that had been stored by the Germans who knew Berlin was going to be bombed. So they had stored the paintings from various museums in a gigantic anti-aircraft tower called the Flakturm. That term means tower. Flakturm Friedrichshain. And so a list had been kept of what went in this place. And because they knew the bombs were coming and they were trying to save some of their own art possessions. So it didn't work. The Friedrichshain, the Flakturm, was bombed. And so most of these paintings were destroyed. This takes us into a whole chapter that we can't talk about today, but we can talk about that. It's a huge chapter, and that is the disappearance, the theft of art by the Nazis, by the Soviets, the unresolved situation of so much art because, for example, the Soviets have never totally admitted what they really have, what they know they destroyed, and so on. So these are huge international political arguments that continue. But as far as is known, this article, as of 1952, showed what was thought to have been destroyed. So number 30 here are the two wings of Petrus Christus, what we call at the museum, what we call Petrus Christus. Now, I have a little better picture of the right wing. So the right wing is St. Catherine of Alexandria. So the left wing was St. John the Baptist. And these are pretty interesting because according to the data, they outsized the central panel. So I don't know how that worked myself. I played around with it here, but I don't think this is good enough because she's too big a person. She would have been, I believe, the same general height as the people in the central painting. But in order to line up the trees, I put it at this resolution and at this size, but one could fool around with this. But back to this, whoops. This is a pretty good painting, a photograph of the painting before it was destroyed. Now, to me, she's St. Catherine of Alexandria. She has two attributes that I know of. She's often with a sword and often with a wheel, because the whole story about her is, and I've told it before, so I'm not going to repeat it, but the whole story about her is that the Roman emperor put her on an awful wheel with spikes in order to kill her. Well, I looked and looked and looked at where is the wheel. I think I really only found it recently. I think it's right here. What do you think? See this right here? This is not, that looks like to me like spokes right there. And it looks like a, what do you call it? Not a really spherical wheel, does it? But I think that's the wheel. And then the sword, of course, is also one of her attributes. Okay, so it would have looked like this, and then the artist who really has proposed this and has been given credit for it is named Lola Gellman, and this is what she published in, and so she shows what it would have been like. Interesting to me, her John the Baptist and her St. Catherine are bigger than the figures here. So that must have been acceptable in the art of the time, and so on. So anyway, we get some idea of what this Petrus Christus was like. As we have it in the museum, I don't think one can see any, it's in a frame. I don't see one can see any kind of hinge marks or anything like that. Anyway, it's one more piece that we have, and apparently the rest of it burned. Okay, I'm going to talk now about triptychs as altarpieces, and this also involves a couple more war stories. If you have a triptych as an altarpiece and you put it behind the altar, that's called a reredo. If you balance it on the altar, on the back side of the altar, then it's a retable. So triptychs made as altarpieces were large, magnificent in many cases, and so extraordinary that they were often kept closed a lot of the time to protect them, but also to add, I believe, a sense of opening them was very special. So sometimes they were only open, for example, if they were Christian, on Easter and Christmas. And some churches would have a few altarpieces that they could rotate as the altar backdrop. And like I told you earlier, sometimes you could see them if you made a contribution. So that was kind of interesting. All right, we're going to talk now about the Eisenheim altarpiece, one of the most complicated, extraordinary altarpieces as a triptych. So this is basically by the artist Grunewald, but he used a creation, a sculpture creation by Nicholas of Haguenau as the basis of it. Because this was located originally and still is in Alsace-Lorraine, it's gone back and forth between French and German possession, depending on the war and so on. So the main part of the triptych is what you see here in the front. And let's talk about the possession of it for a minute, too. This, in 1914, the Germans had Alsace, so they possessed the altarpiece. So they moved it from Alsace, from back here. I told you that where it is in Alsace is Colmar, okay, in a museum called Unterlinden. So that's where it was originally. So the Germans moved it to Munich, and they took it upon themselves to restore it, which in the opinion of the French was too heavy-handed. So the Germans did return it before World War II, but that was short-lived, and at the beginning of World War II, the French moved it to a castle near Limoges. And from there, the Germans got it again, and they took it to a cave in the mountains of Alsace. So at the end of the war, the Allied soldiers and German POWs, not Germans, not willingly, took it from the cave in Alsace to Colmar, where it remains. Okay, so it had been painted for a chapel at Colmar, near Colmar, Eisenheim. It had been painted for a religious group who took care of people with skin diseases. So you call that a laser house. That word comes from the word Lazarus, the name of Lazarus, Dives and Lazarus in the Bible. So yeah, people with terrible skin diseases had terrible social problems because nobody wanted to go near them. They were petrified of catching what they had. And so people with the worst skin diseases would find some help and some housing in a laser house. So in this place in Eisenheim, the monks took care of them, people who had the plague, all kinds of skin diseases, and so on. So therefore, in this painting, in this triptych, the image of Jesus on the cross, which is the main image, is pitted with plague sores. So the body of Jesus looks like the body of the skin disease suffering people who lived there. Obviously, the message was, look, Jesus went through something awful, and so you are going through something awful too. And just pray that Jesus will help you get through it. So it was considered what's called thaumaturgical, and thaumaturgical means miraculous. So the sick people who prayed in front of this picture of the crucifixion was prayed for healing. There was no other help. So I think you can begin to see it in this photo of the art. So look at the skin of Jesus, okay? And look down here, you can see it quite well too. Now I'm going to show you this picture under different light. So Jesus is literally pockmarked with awful sores in this painting. This goes back to the 16th century, and just going back quickly, on the left is Saint Sebastian, a patron saint of people with sores, and on the right, Saint Anthony. This is Saint Anthony of Egypt, the originator of monastery, who became the patron of medieval patron of people with skin diseases. I've also lectured on him. There's a whole lecture on him on Facebook. So yeah, so skin diseases became known as Saint Anthony's fire. And on the left, well, wait a minute, let's go back. I think this one's not Sebastian. This is John the Baptist on the left, who is also a patron, symbolizing the Old Testament and pointing to the New. There's a piece of this painting at the bottom. Okay, this is the support for this. This is known as the predella. Okay, this part here, that's the support for the altarpiece. All right, while we're looking at this version of the photograph of the painting, look right here. Okay, follow me right through the center. That's a seam. This opens. Okay, this opens to the left and to the right. And down here, there's a seam also. You see it? Okay, so we'll come to how this works. This is under different light. I'm also not sure, but I'm not sure why the light is so contrasting. I don't have the answer to that question yet, but it's exactly the same scene. You can see the body of Jesus here, so portrayed as the bodies of those poor people suffering from what was called St. Anthony's fire. We call it ergotism. Almost nobody gets it anymore, because we know what causes it. Anyway, this is the more lightened version of this. Okay, again, you can see the seam here for the triptych. So we have 3 parts, and then it opens. So I think I told you everything on here, except this disease is so awful that it causes hallucinations, it damages your nervous system, and so on. Some people point out that LSD was actually extracted from the same kind of fungus. The fungus was in rye. So if you had the grain rye and you made rye bread, that's how it got spread. But it is now rare because we know how to deal with the fungus, apparently. Okay, so anyway, now let's look at how this triptych functions. So there are 2 sets of panels with 3 configurations. So 2 large paintings and 7 smaller ones. Wow, this is complicated. And yes, usually it was closed so that only the crucifixion was visible in the middle. And but the way it works is the central panels of the first 2 layers open back and reveal the 3rd layer. The 3rd lowest is a sculptural work that pre-existed Grunewald's work by Havenauer, and it's wood carvings. So let's look at this. Okay, here you see how you can see it today. So this is the front. If you open this door right here and you fold it back, okay, then you see two pieces, and that's what's here. Okay, and that has a seam, which if you open it back, each one left, one right, you get to Grunewald's work, which is here. Now this has been taken apart. According to the curator of the museum, people are kind of mad that they took it apart. But the curator says, well, how else could we display it? We can't keep opening and closing it because it would be destructive. So this is how one sees it today. Now, this is how it was. Another way to look at this. Okay, so you open this back. And open, this one stays during the first opening. And when you open it back, this is what you get. Okay, see, now, if you take this right here, and this time open this too, here's the third view. So this is what had already existed, and then Grunewald added the leaves, but this is absolutely intricate. So back to this picture now where you can see it taken apart. I'm going to check the chat again.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, I'll try to come back to these questions in a minute, because I know I'm running out of time, so I want to just finish quickly. So anyway, this war story survived through through the years of both German and French possession, and so thank heavens this exists. Last war story is what's called the Weizstoss triptych. This is in Krakow in Poland. It's in a huge church called the Church of Our Lady. It's the main altar backdrop. So I believe it is a reredo, and because it is huge and heavy. And this is a sculpture. It is also a war story because when the war broke out and the Germans occupied Poland, the Poles took it apart and hid its main statues, because this, remind you, this is sculpture, okay? So they hid the main statues all around the country. The crates were eventually found. They put them in crates. The crates were found by the Nazis and taken to Germany. And the Nazis also found the side panels. And they put them in the basement of the Nuremberg castle. But they also put Polish prisoners down there too, which was pretty interesting because they knew what it was. And so the Polish prisoners sent messages to the underground Polish resistance telling them the triptych was there. So in spite of the heavy bombing of Nuremberg, it survived. Returned to Poland in 1946, underwent restoration. It's considered a national treasure of Poland now. It was back in its place in the Basilica by 1957. Yeah, so that was the last war story. And I'll show it to you once again. You think about what this has been through. Okay, let me see if I answered the questions. I see a question here. Is there a connection between triptychs designated for private worship and the democratization of faith through King James Version? I can't think of any connection offhand that I know between the production of King James and private worship. Certainly with the production of the Bible in the vernacular, the first one being Luther's production of the Bible in German, followed by English and so on. People could read what they had always been told about and check for themselves. So it was all a very important movement. I don't know of any connection, however, with triptychs. Okay, let's see. Okay, a person observes BIPOC in the Bosch triptych. That's interesting. Bosch triptych is amazingly complicated. So much to see there. Let's see. I think I basically touched on everything else that is relevant. Oh, there might be one more that came in. Let's see what it is. Okay. So I would like to thank you all. I would be happy to take some questions right now. If you,
You can unmute yourselves if you would prefer that way to ask your question.
It's Maria. Thank you so much for the lecture. And I have a question. Do you know something about the author of the St. Mary's altar? Who is the artist?
Yeah, it's called Weitstoss, and that's the anglicized pronunciation of his Polish name. And I think there is information about him, but I do not know it right now. So I would suggest you search for Weitstoss, but then it will take you to probably some Polish sources.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I see more chat. Okay, well, someone says it's amazing that any triptychs are still all together. In some ways it is, because as I said, they've been through a lot. You could, of course, make a lot more money if you sold them part by part. For those, that ended up going on the art market somehow. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's amazing that all the art, given the wars, especially, the European wars, it's amazing that we have the art we do. Okay, I'd like to thank you all. And if you'd like to see any of the presentations I've done relevant to some of the places I talked about in here, like St. Catherine's or like St. Anthony of Egypt and so on, please look on the Timken's Facebook. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.